podcast role. Welcome in.
You're listening to an Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast, a proud member of the Podcast Roll Network. Hello, Jamie.
Peter, off to hike the Himalayas? Where are you headed with that jacket?
It was chilly. This is my backup jacket in my little bag. I just spent the last few days with my niece and nephew, and I just made it back home, and nice. I put on this jacket because I was cold.
How was the visit? Did you enjoy it?
Oh, yeah. You know, I'm so pleased that I got to help out while my brother and his wife were out of town. And I do think that they may have planned it because on Thursday night, we went to a band concert that I think is still going. They had every band play, the 6th grade band, the 7th grade band, the 8th grade band, the 9th grade band, the wind ensemble, the jazz band, a trumpet quartet, a trombone quartet, a baritone quintet. I was like, whoa, oh my God. And as they were like making little transitions between the bands, turn to your partner and, say hello. I was like, oh, like I've done this in church, and on to you, and on peace on to you. It was a long night. I had thought I was kind of done with middle school band concerts.
Yeah, you might be done you only need one every 40 years, is it? How many years is it?
It was just, woof. And then I strategically parked on the far side of the parking lot, backed into the spot right by the exit. And my nephew's like, what are we doing? I'm like, we're so far away from the entrance. I'm like, oh, you will be so pleased because on the way out, we'll be ready to go. This is not my first rodeo. Almost, 30 years in public education? Like, I know how to get in and out of these things.
I'm glad you had fun at the concert.
One of the things I did...
Did you guys sleep at the concert?
You'd think you should
doing some your toothbrush.
Oh, we're gonna sleep, and it was in like a gymnasium that they converted into an auditorium. So it was could have been a little bit more comfortable. I will say this though, this is totally in line with our guest Jennifer Light because the students had a lot of responsibilities in terms of greeting and talking about the music that they were going to be playing. And I was really impressed with that piece of clearly they value student voice. And there were a number of these little ensembles that were directed by students, created by students, practice on their own. And so I was like, oh, this is really cool. And, obviously today we're going to talk a little bit about Junior Republics and Jennifer Light's work and the book that she wrote. And I just this is an easy sort of connection between what I just experienced with kids. I mean, obviously Junior Republics goes so much deeper because they owned it all. This was a democratic system designed, created, managed by children entirely.
Yes, I have some thoughts. I loved it. I thought she was amazing. I really loved her. I'm like, oh, there's yet another person that I want to go study with, like my 65 and older to go study with these people tour is getting larger and larger at different universities all over the country. She was amazing.
Funniest tour jacket ever, like tour t-shirt. Oh, small crowds. It was just Jamie and like all these different people he went and visited.
You and I should do a 1970s style album like Free to Be You and Me, but about...
Oh my God, I love it. I actually would show it to you on my bookcase. Oh, it is up there.
Do you have the album? No, you don't have the album.
Of course I do, but this is I've got the book too.
Oh, Jesus.
Look at this. Dear Peter, something to grow up and into. Love, Joan and Jeff Ostley. I don't know who they are, but they gave it to me when I was born.
That's so great. That's amazing. Oh, speaking of which, I forgot to tell you this.
It's all right to cry. Crying gets the sad out of you. It's all right to cry. It might make you feel better. Raindrops from your eyes, washing all the mad out of you. Raindrops from your eyes. It might make you feel better. It's all right to feel things, though feelings may be strange.
Oh my God.
Feelings are such real things, and they change and change and change.
Listen, brother, no one signed up for this.
You just hit a total, like, a gusher. You're like, oh, let me just lance this one.
I did. I was like, it's like the middle school concert. I didn't expect that we were all going to do the baritone quartet.
Oh my God.
Okay.
I was like, oh, okay. Wow, there's another. But okay. However, like Jennifer Light in our conversation says a Junior Republic, as she was talking about, the idea was to give as much power as possible to the kids to create a miniature society to help them understand how American democracy works. And I saw a little glimpse and little pieces of that little components at this concert. And I think that's why I wanted to mention it. I was like, oh, this is so cool. Kids have agency and decision-making. And
Wait,
it's
did the
up to
kids
them.
decide the...
Now, on the small ensembles, yes. They chose their music. They practiced. They worked together. You could see who was sort of leading and who was following. And you could see sort of how that might shift depending on the sections that they were playing. It was really neat. And that to me was the most inspiring piece. I mean, I love listening to kids play music to some extent. I mean, to me, it's beautiful. Some of your most difficult kids, there they are, like playing an instrument, playing their song, and there's nothing more engaging than that.
I'm all in. I love that too. I totally love that. I also know the feeling of, so the program says we're going 2 hours and we are now turning the corner on 2.5.
I know. Wait, so 2 hours until intermission or 2 hours? Don't forget, you can get some baked goods in the I don't want your baked goods. I just want to go home. Oh, so I can let
I don't like blondies. I don't want a blondie.
No. What is the point of those? And now my niece is hopped up on blondies. And can we go home? No, we can't go home yet because we're going to watch the second half of this marathon concert. Oh God, my tummy hurts. I know, because you ate 15 blondies. You shouldn't have let me. Yeah, there are a lot of things I shouldn't have done.
Oh, so good.
Yeah. All right. So listen, I'd like to jump into the conversation. We'll come back out after talk about it. Anything that you wanted to sort of mention as we go in?
Besides, I mean, I obviously just told you, I think she's amazing. I loved it. This is another one of those where I see the need for you and Mason in terms of you guys are running the podcast. And I'm like, get out of the way. This woman is brilliant. She's amazing. Like, I don't need any interruption. I don't need any connections. I just want Dr. Light to talk. That's what I want.
Yeah, that's fair.
It was so great.
I will tell you, of the three of us, I thought Mason from Getting Smart podcast, Mason and Jennifer, they were fantastic. I was like, man, I'm not sure I'm holding my own in this conversation. And that was okay, because it was really fun to be a part of that kind of conversation, this crossover, this sort of shared podcast.
Yeah, that was super fun.
Getting Smart will do as well.
The crossover thing was really fun. I will say I'm so excited for people to listen to this because of the work that we do around student leadership. And she even uses the word of, I think it was radical student agency. And that's the language I'm using from now on.
Perfect.
Like that phrase is, listen for how she manifests that, how she talks about it historically, how she thinks about it now. Like, it's spectacular.
Yep. And speaking of historically, she will say to us, she'll remind us that the history is full of examples showing that when we trust kids with real responsibility, that they are capable of extraordinary things. And so that leads me to our sponsor for today's show, because the question is how do we balance the kind of student agency with the academic demands that students face right now? And that's where IXL comes in. In a way, just as Junior Republics, who once gave young people this chance to experience democracy in a personalized way, one could argue that IXL also uses smart data and real-time insights to create learning paths that are tailored to each individual student. So if you're curious about what that could look like in your school or your classroom, head on over to ixl.com/imperfect and see what IXL can do. You're listening to an Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. I'm Peter Stiepelman.
I'm Jamie Almanzan.
And we'll see you on the other side. Today on an Imperfect Leader, we are trying something we've never done before. It's a crossover episode with my friend Mason Pashia from the Getting Smart podcast, a member of the Podcast for All Network. And, together we get to speak with Dr. Jennifer Light, Byrne Dibner Professor of History of Science and Technology and Professor of Urban Studies and Planning at MIT. She's also the author of The State of Childhood, which examined youth-led junior republics. And you might be wondering, what is a junior republic? And you will soon find out. Professor Light is also involved in the MIT project on Embodied Education, focusing on how movement and physical activity can be integrated into academic instruction to enhance learning. So I'm really excited to jump into this conversation. Jen, welcome to both an Imperfect Leader, and I guess if it's okay, Mason, I get to welcome her to Getting Smart.
Woo-hoo!
That's true.
Thank you.
That is true.
What? I've never had a guest that give a woohoo right at the beginning. This is exciting. But
She just got off.
It's so nice to meet you.
Irons in the background.
Yes, for those who are watching the video, it's a perplexing background, but one that is enticing, no doubt. Yeah, exactly. So this conversation came about because I was taking a walk with Mason last year in West Seattle, and he was telling me about junior republics. And to our listeners, if you haven't had a chance to listen to Mason's episode on this, I'll put a link on the show notes. He dives right into junior republics. But then on a lark, I had asked a friend of mine, Dave Sue, who's a professor at MIT, if he knew you, Jen, and he texted back, she's in my department. So I thought, what luck. I guess if it's all right, we'll start actually with Mason. How did you find the state of childhood? Talk a little bit about that.
This might be one of the rare pro-social AI results is meeting Jen today. I was chatting, I think, with maybe it was ChatGPT at the time, and I was asking a bunch of questions about youth agency, specifically around youth movement building. So young people who have really lived democracy in a meaningful way. And it just kept digging a little deeper and be like, give me a tangible example, give me a tangible example. And eventually it gave me these junior republics as a tangible example of youth democracy. And of course, like you, Peter, I'd never heard of them. I was a little surprised I hadn't heard of them because we live in a space that talks so much about youth agency and real world learning and all these other things. And then I was like, who's an expert on this? I want to talk to them. And so it gave me Jen's name and the book. And so I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. I should reach out and make something happen. And sort of fortuitously and in a roundabout way, we came together today. But yeah, I think it was just a rogue curiosity that I was following at the time.
I love
so why don't
it.
if you don't mind, isn't that cool? I know.
Yeah, because this is sort of in the MIT context, this project is about as far away from that as I could imagine.
Totally.
Yeah, it's totally human driven, right? And dependent on human interaction and cooperation and connection. Mason, if you don't mind, why don't you go off with the first question?
Yeah, Jen, I think just in order to really dig in today, I would love to know like how you came to junior republics, Jen, and really what they are. I think our audience would benefit from probably a common definition so they can picture something as we talk today.
Sure. So maybe let me start with what they are, and then I could tell you how I got into it. Junior Republic is a miniature city or state or nation run by kids. And the first self-titled Junior Republic appeared in 1895 in Freeville, New York. It was organized by a guy named William George, who was a businessman, philanthropist, who in New York City, and he owned some farmland in upstate New York. He was also part of the good government movement, which in the turn of the century, progressive era, was getting worried that the, swelling populations of immigrants in U.S. cities who came from countries where there was autocratic or monarchical rule didn't quite understand how democracy works. And, there needed to be some way to fix what he thought was a problem because many immigrant groups were fine with political bosses. He saw this, and many others in the good government movement saw this as corrupt, something they wanted to move away from. In any case, adults were not amenable to being told what to do, but kids, especially poor immigrant kids in New York City's worst neighborhoods, were excited when he said, hey, I'm going to take you into the countryside for the summer. There's no charge, and we're going to have fun. And what he did when he took about 150 kids up to Freeville in 1895 is he gave them a constitution and said they were going to run a miniature version of the United States. He started out as president, but the kids were going to be the senators, the House of Representatives. They were business people, and there were a few supervising adults, but the idea was to give as much power as possible to the kids to create a miniature society, mostly focused on the politics, to help them understand how American democracy works. And to his tremendous surprise, given the problems he'd seen with immigrant adults, in his home terrain, these kids were incredibly patriotic, super passionate, and, studied the minutia of civil service regimes so that they could sit exams to become police officers and other members of the Republic Civil Service. So he was stunned. And as he saw what the kids could do, he gradually took a more and more hands-off approach and gave them opportunities to both have political debates and to create new things in the Republic. For example, one of the super interesting topics of debate was female suffrage. George himself, not in favor of it. He asked the kids what they thought. The kids decided that they wanted to try it. And it actually convinced George himself that female suffrage was a good idea. And not only that, outside observers came to watch in later years. And the Republic's use of kids in this way, girls as political citizens and also in political office, was actually used to argue for women's suffrage in the United States. There was also an economic system. Kids started businesses, hotels and restaurants, a barber shop, contracting businesses. It was the kids who basically built up the Republic campus through these businesses.
It makes me think about when I was a third grade teacher, we used to read the book Roxaboxen. And this is like sort of, if you're ever familiar with the book, it's like the kids create a society on their own without adult intervention. It's a picture book, and it's exactly what you're describing. And I'm thinking to myself, what a unique idea. What a thoughtful, sort of interesting. And I'm certain that the author must have had some sort of understanding or knowledge of the junior republics. Yeah, so I'm curious, where did you learn about them?
This comes out of very personal interest when I became a parent. I'm trained as a historian, so I walk around the world saying, how did we get things that, operate like this today? And so I was interested, why do we parent the way we parent? Why do schools look the way they do? Started reading books in the history of childhood and the history of education. And I noticed both genres often had one sentence, possibly a paragraph, but usually one sentence mentioning there was this guy named William George. He ran a reformatory that was modeled on the United States. Now, I work at MIT, and many of my colleagues in the education space are working on video games and virtual worlds as educational simulations. And something was like, ding, ding, this is like a virtual world circa 1895. What is this? And then I just started reading, and, what is mentioned in basically one sentence in these books turns out to have been a massive movement that rapidly escaped William George's efforts to control it. It impacted schools. It impacted youth-serving institutions like boys' clubs and settlement houses. And I loved weaving these strands together.
It seems the total antithesis to Frederick Taylor's thoughts on how to create schools, which are very much built into the factory model. And, it's almost all of these kids are now entitled to come for a free and public education. And why don't we control it by having them sit in rows and walk in lines? And, well, schools so similarly look that way today. And yet, Mason's done some work around micro schools, which seems in a lot of ways to be a departure from what has become such traditional schooling. And sometimes I joke that the Frederick Taylor could come back to this world and say, oh, the two institutions that still look so familiar to me are prisons and schools. But micro schools are a way to say we want something very different. And so I'm just kind of curious from your own coverage of micro schools, Mason, and community-centered learning environments, how do you see parallels between that and what Jen just described as junior republics?
Great point. I think that's really interesting. There's certainly a iterative approach to both of them. I think that micro schools kind of at their best are rapid learning environments to kind of meta learn about themselves and then change on the fly and adapt to the learners. I think fewer and far between there are micro schools that are actually co-designed with the young people, which sounds a little bit more in step with what a junior republic might have been. But I still think that's actually super rare. I think it's very hard for educators and learning designers to really pass over like co-authoring rights to students to help them construct what it means to have a day. So there's versions of this for sure, but that movement aside from the flexibility, I think the flexibility is really the core similarity between the two, and that they both are places where you can incubate an idea and then run with it. But it's definitely interesting. I'm curious how many. I think the Waldorf schools are probably like an extension of this as well. Those are a national network that have been doing really agentic learning for a long time, that are very student led and very focused on like a community approach in the classroom, which I think is maybe in some ways, that is the most radical innovation to me of these junior republics, is the fact that they were communal and not individualistic. Like giving the student the ability to do personalized learning is one thing, but doing that in a way that actually has all of these touch points with other students, and so you're all sort of raising at the same time, is really unique to, I think, this movement. But Jen, I'd be curious if you've seen other stuff that it rhymes with for you or pushes forward.
Actually, I wanted to pick up on something Peter said about factories and prisons.
Yeah.
Because on the one hand, I was endlessly fascinated, and I still am, even years after the book has come out, in these institutions, because on the one hand, you're exactly right. They're giving kids tremendous agency that, they don't have in other settings. And yet, this agency was designed to discipline them toward a particular mode of behavior, which, as I was explaining who William George was and what he thought was wrong with, how immigrants thought and acted. And so the prison and factory connection is super interesting. William George and a number of the folks associated with the Republic movement also advised factory owners, and in even more numerous examples, prison administrations, to create self-government within their institutions as a way to move away or militaristic styles of discipline, and essentially use democratic participation as a form of disciplining. Because democracy, the practice of democracy, of course, can look like a lot of different things. And junior republics were very diverse, but by and large, for example, they couldn't have, labor unions for the businesses. They couldn't be socialist. They had to be, Democratic or Republican, and so on and so forth. So there's this weird feature. And I think that's part of why republics were so popular, because you could argue for them on these more radical, John Dewey, new education, follow the child, these kinds of arguments. And then also some more conservative social efficiency proponents at the turn of the last century, when I'm thinking about different educators. So endlessly interesting.
It sounds as if potentially, instead of sort of an autocratic one person is going to determine a punishment or consequence, that the introduction of due process or a jury of peers and things like that become sort of valued or valuable. And one of the questions I wanted to ask you, and let me just pause for a moment and just say, our guest today is Jennifer Light, Byrne Divner Professor of History of Science and Technology and a Professor of Urban Studies and Planning at MIT, the author of The State of Childhood, which examined youth-led junior republics. And one of the big themes in your book is this radical, youth agency, the idea that young people were literally the entire electorate and the governing body. And I started to think to myself, as you were just talking about what that might look like in schools today, and how we've seen a real increase in things like restorative justice, restorative practices, peer court, things like that, to give agency and ability for your peers to play a role in sort of creating the cultural field that exists within the school. To say, these are our norms, or these are our values, or this is how we want to be together. And it's actually not necessarily always going to be the adult that's going to issue a consequence, but rather your peers are going to listen. And for the sort of low level, right? Kid brings a knife to school. They don't bring it in front of their peers to say, what do you think we should do? But rather some of the pieces that really disrupt sort of the cultural field of, respect and those types of things. So I'm just kind of curious. I'm not sure exactly what the question is, other than what can we take away from junior republics then and maybe see its application within schools today?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we can take away both the specific activities, like you're mentioning, peer courts. We can also take away the ideas about youth capacity. which looked quite different in the 1890s and even the 19-teens from today. And remember, I said I got interested in this because I'm a historian, and I'm like, where did these ideas come from? Parenting young kids as I was writing the book, my son is 6 and I'm reading about miner, kids working in the mines and they're 6 years old. And I'm like, I can't imagine this, but that was normal then, right? So what can we take for today? I'm not saying send our children back to the mines, but what I'm saying is the idea that yes, a kid is perfectly capable to serve on the peer court, or actually my son, who is now 14, is at a high school where kids write the cell phone policy and the dress code, and their scaffolding skills for the real world, and also extremely invested in the policy that results and have a much more nuanced understanding of individual versus collective needs and how to balance them. I mean, things like that.
I love it.
Do exist.
Yeah, it makes me think about, what about like school boards that allow or invite for a student representative? I was sometimes lobbied to do that, and I never really saw how it would work because of certain, confidentiality kind of things. But yet I'm seeing more and more examples of you can actually have authentic representation and having clear guidelines. They can't obviously be in executive session when you're talking about teachers' employment. Yet at the same time, there's so much more that goes on in a school district that they can play an active role in guiding policy and practice. But Mason, I want to turn it to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think two things. One is just a provocation that I think we can keep taking the junior republics into the present with, which is like, when I was in school, we did something that was called Exchange City. It was like a one-day city simulation where everybody occupied a business role or something. And it was fine.
Or like junior achievement.
Yeah.
Junior achievement.
It's like a junior achievement extension. It's a cool program, and it was useful in terms of some like visualization and really living in an environment, but it was completely lacking in all of the things that I think made the Junior Republic so useful, which was this like consensus building, this democracy piece, this understanding of the collective. And instead, the other one was just like, I think I was a lawyer, and I just sat in an office and people brought me sandwiches sometimes. And that was my memory of city. And so
if you want to be a lawyer, you get sandwiches.
I mean, I'm shocked I did not become one because of the awareness built on that day. So I think it's a little bit of a yes and. There are people that are starting some of this work, but I think there's a way to make it really rich, powerful learning experiences that extend beyond the 4-hour like project or whatever simulation they've designed. And two, we're working on a project right now with some of Jen's colleagues actually from MIT using their tool Cortico, which is a really cool oral history AI tool that lets you do community conversations and have a more democratized consensus making process. So we're working with students at a high school to basically host conversations with their peers, record them, and then work with AI to basically identify patterns in all the conversations they're having to see like what is actually happening. And as a result of that, they're going to have to design either a policy or make a recommendation to the school board on we should change this because of all of this like data that we've collected. And I think we are getting to a place where smart tools are actually making these things easier, like parsing tons of data and letting that be something that is owned by the students is just easier than I think it's ever been before. That's another soft plug for Cortico and MIT, but also just an exciting development, I think, in the space of practicing democracy at a grain size that you can put your arms around rather than just saying it in a more highfalutin 4-year cycle term.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I think I want to go back and also just re-emphasize, we have a sense of what kids can do. It's a historical thing. It changes over time. And understanding that it's pretty well understood that, gender and race are socially constructed, right? They have changed over time. Our expectations about what people in different categories are capable of or allowed to do. We understand that's changed. I think it's not as widely understood that it goes for age as well. And I'm not quite sure how one changes the common wisdom. I mean, I wrote a history about how it changed. There are a lot of threads, but that's a piece of it. Show kids are capable of amazing things still, even if we don't always allow them to do it.
Jen, can I ask a quick follow-up? It sounds like this was a part of a broader self-directed research study and just sort of like the history of childhood learning, et cetera. Yeah. Why did this stop? Like, when did Junior Republic stop spreading, specifically in the States? Because I think they had a little bit of a longer life in Europe, if I remember correctly.
Probably when a random guy couldn't say to these kids, come with me up to the upstate New York for the summer.
But we have summer camps. We have all kinds of ways in which you have.
No, it's true. And parents sign their kids up. Yeah, I was just thinking about one of the pieces of who participated. And it was like children who were in poverty, recent immigrants. Like, it wasn't necessarily, I mean, families maybe were like, thank God there's some place my kid can go and for the summer. But
so actually, yeah, you're exactly right, Mason. The history of Junior Republics is part of the story I was telling about the transformation of childhood. And I will get to that in a sec. But Junior Republic specifically started for immigrant and indigent youth. But like I was saying, quickly attracted all kinds of supporters. The Freeville Republic became a tourist attraction. I mean, literally, if you read Baedeker's from 1903, it's listed. Go look at it. And the idea spread to rural youth. Willis Brown, based in Indiana, was the chief architect of what he called boy cities, which were the equivalent, sometimes in YMCAs, sometimes at schools, sometimes summer camps. Wilson Gill spread the idea in New York City and then to many other urban districts, starting with immigrant districts, but then shifting to middle-class youth. He called them school cities, school republics. So they don't all have exactly the same name, but they're part of a family tree of institutions, which, we were talking about factories and prisons. That's part of the branching of the family tree, serving all kinds of different populations. There were even women's clubs prior to female suffrage who would play city or do some sort of political stimulation, in part is inspired by the girls at the George Junior Republic. So this idea was everywhere. But Mason, your question is like, why did they disappear? The backdrop to the story of the Junior Republics is the question about basically, why would we let our 6-year-old go to the mine in 1870? And why do we barely let them out of the house in 2025? And part of that is about the rise of what scholars call the sheltered childhood, which was a contrast from prior ways of doing things. The rise of the sheltered childhood, that is very much connected to transformations in the American economy, where we moved from the family economy, mother, father, children creating goods at home, to a wage economy where the expectation, not the ideal expectation is the man goes off to work, the woman maintains the household, the kid goes to school. Of course, not every family conformed to that. Anyway, so schools were foundational to this idea of sheltering. But in order to get new kinds of populations into the school system, I mean, you guys being in the education world, you know this, the numbers of Americans who went to school after 6th grade or 8th grade at the turn of the last century was much lower than now. And how did we entice people to continue their education? Before there were laws for compulsory schooling, part of it was updating the curriculum to map onto the needs of an industrializing society and also appeal to children who ordinarily would be in the workforce. And so schools add vocational and manual training at this time. And then they're starting to add some of the components of junior republics, because what would a kid who is not in school do other than be in the labor force making money, which is very appealing? They might be roaming the streets, have a lot of autonomy, like who wants to sit in a classroom all day? So these kind of active learning opportunities where kids have a lot of agency, back to what I was saying about disciplining, there's kind of two sides to this, right? They're There's an effort to bring kids into the school system to discipline them through these things that seem to give them a lot of agency, but it's within a more sheltered, protected, adult supervised space. In any case, as republics and their component activities play out in the first couple decades of the 20th century, we go from having things like student senates that are direct simulations of the US government to things like student councils, which are more watered down. And this is tracking with that larger story of the sheltering of American youth, where gradually their, connection to the outside world is reduced. And these simulated activities are replaced with kind of educational or recreational.
Right. A textbook, and they're going to tell you how democracy works as opposed to allowing them to get messy because it's messy.
Right.
Democracy's messy.
Exactly. I was on the student council, in high school in my freshman year, and it had, we planned a movie night, right? It's our grand achievement.
That was about it. You got to meet with the principal once in a while, and they would tell you what was happening, and they wouldn't really solicit any advice, except for if there was maybe some question that they needed to say, did you talk to any students about this? No, yeah, I brought it up at my student council. And yet you had no real agency. Although I'll tell you, I have a child right now who's a senior in high school who's very involved with Model UN. And Model UN, as I observe, is incredibly student-led and really fascinating just to sort of see how I wonder if someone who participated in Junior Republics would see that as I could see how there are similarities or why that works in this setting, in this sheltered setting, creating, I guess, guardrails, but allowing anything to happen within them.
Yes. I mean, the predecessor to Model UN, Model League of Nations from the 1920s, it's another branch of the tree, and it's one of the ones that survives today.
Amazing. So this has been fascinating. And I know that those who are interested in student agency, student voice, really elevating the role that students get to play within their schools, and almost not even saying students, but children, because students is also sort of a factory term. It sort of pulls away that every child is an individual with their own, dreams and abilities and things like that. But I certainly want to recommend that people check out The State of Childhood and maybe start to think about its historical context and then what that might look like in schools today. Mason, is there anything that you'd like to say as we sort of conclude this portion?
Just the way that some of this stuff is cyclical, I think it's always useful. We always think we invent stuff in education and education innovation, and a lot of the time it's beneficial to look backwards and to recognize like the micro schools movement is kind of the same thing that was where schools started. It was basically homeschools. So like we sort of recreate solutions, and over time, hopefully they're getting stronger and better, but it's always worth checking in with the past.
I love that. And I think I'll just say for your listeners, my book is available for free on the MIT Press website. So you can buy it, but please take a free copy.
Hey, district leaders, I know you already know this. In schools worldwide, cell phones are posing real challenges on student engagement and mental well-being, and I want you to meet Yonder, a proud sponsor of an Imperfect Leader. And let me share this story from a visit I made to some schools in Silicon Valley. I asked some kids what they liked about Yonder, and after some funny looks, they shared that actually, with Yonder, teachers don't have to battle with them over phones anymore. In fact, one kid said to me he didn't have to worry anymore about his parents texting him in class, and the kid next to him sort of shoved him and goes, "Texting? My mom used to FaceTime me in class." I want to introduce you to a support system that increases teaching and learning. I want you to discover why 1 million students choose Yonder daily. Minimize distractions, maximize learning potential. To learn more, go to overyonder.com. YONDR. So I want to talk a minute about the Mosaic Project. It is one of our favorite organizations and has over 25 years of experience empowering students to really celebrate differences, communicate assertively, and resolve conflict peacefully at their outdoor school. I happen to have experience being part of the Mosaic Project, and so I can absolutely tell you it's an amazing organization. Their innovative SEL curriculum is now available to our Imperfect Leader audience. And so you can get a 10% discount through their new documentary film-based Mosaic Classroom project. So just let the people know during your onboarding process to receive that 10% discount is to just mention an Imperfect Leader. Learn more about the Mosaic Project at mosaicproject.org.
This is Greg Meyer, Jamie's partner at APC Leadership Collaborative. Superintendents know that school principals are the single biggest lever that any school district has for improving student joy and success. Unfortunately, there's very little professional development for the specific things that a principal has to do to improve their school. At APC Leadership Collaborative, we specialize in coaching principals to take on audacious goals, build their leadership skills, and make big improvements in their school. If that inspires you, let's connect and talk about how we can collaborate. Find APC Leadership Collaborative online at apccolab.com.
When leaders think in systems, they think differently. They see the big picture, making decisions that create coherence and strengthen communication across their teams. They build adaptability, flexibility, and engagement. Every day, school leaders face complex challenges, from student engagement to staff alignment. What if your team could see those challenges as part of a bigger picture? That's what happens when you think in systems. It's how leaders turn complexity into connection and challenges into opportunities for growth. At the Waters Center for Systems Thinking, we help educators and organizations build this capacity, developing the habits and tools that turn vision into action. Think differently, think in systems. Sign up for our webinars, free resources, or a consultation by visiting our website, which you can find in the show notes.
We're back for segment 2 of this crossover episode of An Imperfect Leader and Getting Smart. And our guest today is Jennifer Light, Byrne-Dibner Professor of History of Science and Technology and the Professor of Urban Studies and Planning at MIT and the author of The State of Childhood. And I mentioned in the opening introduction that you're involved in the MIT project on embodied education, focusing on movement, physical activity, and how it can be integrated into academic instruction to enhance learning. When I was superintendent in one of my elementary schools, the principal and the director of PE, physical education, dedicated a space in their building, in this one of my 22 elementary schools, for children to engage in intentional exercises. Like one that comes to mind is you're crossing the midline with their arms to build stronger connection. And I'm wondering if you could tell, and I actually texted her recently, Angie Gerson gave me a full rundown in a text. I was like, it was incredible. It had profound results. Can you tell us about the MIT project on embodied education?
So you guys sit in the education space where there has been an emerging body of research about how we don't just think in here, but the rest of our bodies are involved in making knowledge. And also some education research finding exactly as your colleague did, that when students move their bodies, it enhances executive function. It can tap a second memory system in the body. It can increase creativity. I mean, the way I see it sitting at MIT is that if there were a technology that could do all the things for learning that movement could do, we would have it in every school. And so the project on embodied education is about the why and the how. And so my colleagues and I, we are trying to design curriculum. And, some are formal lesson plans, others are lesson ideas. We put them all up for free on our website. We are happy to crowdsource new ideas. If anyone in your audience is doing this and, wants to share, that would be awesome. But in addition to showing curriculum ideas, I'm trying to show institutionally how this could happen. So I sit on the academic side of Mass Ave, which is the big street that bisects the campus academic from the dorms and the athletic center. And so my collaborators are all in our athletic department, our physical and education and wellness group. And they have a tremendous amount of movement expertise, and our classes are cross-listed, and we're trying to help students, learn both the brain science and the education science and how to move. And then they create curriculum. So yesterday actually was our final class of the semester. We had about 20 visitors from the Cambridge Public Schools who teach math and science. And my student projects were games to teach the Algebra 1 curriculum, which would blow your mind. We had a tug of war to teach linear and exponential growth, that kind of thing. It was very joyous.
Yeah.
And very quick. I mean, I've been an educator for more than 30 years. I'm trying to make this as easy as possible for someone to adopt.
My brain as a risk manager was like, oh, tug of war. Oh, I hope there was a lot of pre-teaching before they even started that. If you were to do that in a school.
It was a soft floor. It was a soft floor. There was a lot of giggling. Good. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
If, education can have more giggling in the algebra curriculum, it will be more memorable, and the physical activity.
True to that. That made me think three things. One, your background is making more sense, your virtual background. Two, I think there is something about that is super connected to the interest in junior republics. I think kinetic movement learning there's one way to make it sticky, and then and bring joy, and then there's another to do like more real world. So like that the junior republics, you're doing things in the real world with your real body in a way that feels like there's stakes for it. And then I think another question for you, I'm kind of just curious if this shows up within your department, but like I know you're in urban planning and studies as well, which is a personal interest of mine, but I'm thinking about how this connects to like place-based education. So is embodied learning just within your own body, or is it actually within the context of place? And whether that be like, I'm thinking of like song lines in Australia, the kind of walking and singing as a way of navigating and remembering. How do you think about kinetic movement with relationship to place as either a context or a thing that can teach you?
So that is incredibly interesting. So I see two connections. One is that the cognitive science that, looks at what's happening below the neck has also ventured into how we think with our environment. That's not my personal specialty, but there's a great book by a science journalist, Annie Paul, that talks about this. It's the best digested synthesis I know. And so since I'm at MIT, when I talk to people about embodied education, I do tend to emphasize the, cognitive science, learning science piece. But the truth is learning with our bodies, thinking with our bodies, knowing the world with our bodies, like that is the most ancient practice.
Right.
And so it is absolutely place-based. And so one of the things that I think is super interesting is the way that movement can help us access indigenous or alternative epistemologies. And those are often place-based.
I'll check out that book. That sounds super interesting. And totally, again, things are circular or cyclical.
Exactly.
Yeah. We're coming towards the end. And, between Getting Smart and An Imperfect Leader, we have thousands of regular listeners. And I'm curious, from the work that you do, what advice would you give to an aspiring leader?
So I think I'm going to go back to one of the things I said right at the outset, which is I'm a historian, and I go through the world saying, why do we do things that way? And of course, leaders are often thinking about the future, designing the future. So I think I invite them to think historically about the world they're in. How did we get to things being this way? Could they be different? Because it's important to understand how we got to where we are if you're going to change it, at least I think. And then I think actually the point that Mason and I were just talking about is that sometimes the best ideas are in the past and we push them aside for understandable reasons at the time we pushed them aside, but they are worth revisiting.
I love it. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Scott Nearing's work. From 1910 to 1912, he traveled the country. He was paid by Women's Magazine to go look at and look for new ways of doing education. So it was called The New Education, 100 years later or something like that. And it's very funny to me because as Mason pointed out and as you confirmed, it's what we're doing right now around place-based learning or project-based learning is exactly what he was advocating for based on what he observed all across the country. And I'm curious, I'm going to go back and look at the book to see what kind of references he might have made to junior republics, because so much of what he elevates for the reader is basically this fundamental or foundational question of, are schools designed for children or are children designed for schools? And depending on how you answer that question really reveals your values about what you expect and can expect from children. Really grateful for your time today. Our guest today was Jennifer Light, Byrne Divner Professor of History of Science and Technology and Professor of Urban Studies and Planning at MIT, the author of The State of Childhood, and it really examined youth-led junior republics. Mason, I'm grateful to your time. This was great fun. I really thank you for joining me and for letting me be a part of your network as well for a moment.
Likewise. Thanks for making this happen, Peter. Great to be here. Jen, great to meet you.
This was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Jen, thank you so much for making the time. Really grateful.
Welcome back, Peter. I get to, in this role that I get to do with you on the podcast, I feel very lucky in that I often just get to have these conversations with you. It's so wonderful. And I'm very interested in meeting everybody you get to interview. But sometimes someone like Dr. Light comes around and I'm like, oh, I wish I was there. That was such a fun conversation. And obviously right up our alley. I want to know, when you think about this concept of junior republics and the diminishment, what she talked about in terms of what she called it, basically the protection of children, right? The protection of the upbringing of children or the sheltered child. The one that really stood out to me, and this is where I'm going to start, because it'll help us get into the broader sense of junior republics, but to move from what the junior republic was into student advisory. Or a student council.
Yeah, student council.
We
Do you mind, though?
Night.
Can we back up just a quick second? Because in our intro, we don't really talk about junior republics and what they are. Obviously, our listeners have listened to this conversation now, so they know what a junior republic is. But just sort of, just to set the sort of the context and sort of anchor ourselves, this idea that junior republics were this like miniature city or state or nation that were run by kids. And so now I want to go back to exactly what you said in terms of, how did this sort of experiment that seems so promising in a lot of ways sort of get all of a sudden now when we look at like student agency and student voice that seemed like a novel concept to even consider have been watered down to these sort of ineffectual student councils, and
kids
to your
running
point,
on
sheltering of American youth.
Exactly. How did it this is why I think her lens, Dr. Light's lens, and her ability to say, how did we get here? What's the thing? What was the original idea? And that is so helpful here. And it connects to a lot of other conversations you and I have had about the sheltering of the youth. I'm inspired by the idea of the radical student agency that she's bringing and disappointed in myself as an educator in that I didn't think to create it.
Right. We would create simulations. But don't forget, Friday, we're doing, we're writing this Constitution and we're going to live it for the next 4 days or something.
Yes, we're doing it together.
That was crazy. Let's get back to
classroom
having control.
Yeah, can you imagine? They decided to get rid of desks. Laziness.
I know. I was so inspired. I mean, even like the piece about one of the topics of debate was about female suffrage and that the kids decided we want to try it and it actually convinced George that female suffrage was a good idea.
Turns out George against women voting. I mean, any political figure whatsoever. And once again, proven every time I have led groups of students to have honest conversations about what they would like to see change. Yeah, they're smarter than you.
Yeah, it often goes back to my own sort of what I constantly say. This is an adult issue. It's not a kid issue. Yeah. When we are so afraid or we tie anti-DEI, into contracts and grant proposals and those kind of things because we'd rather not be uncomfortable. The kids are like, what are you talking about? Like this, of course we want to talk about this. Of course we want to figure this out. And to me, it seemed like a really good example of what if we allowed the kids, which you're seeing all over. Kids are protesting right now, walking out, like demanding a better future for themselves than we have given them.
Well, I guess I'm very grateful for that. I'm grateful that they are basically taking agency as opposed to us creating a space for them to have it because it's clearly not us.
Yeah.
The thing that I thought of in relation to that example of the junior republic and coming up, basically trying out, giving, in this case, girls power and power to vote, power to be a part of the civil society that they were creating, was that their brains, they're faster, meaning that they're just more pliable, right? That means that they they can create new ways of thinking faster than we can.
And they're comfortable with being uncomfortable. They're comfortable with being wrong and learning from it. When we talk about growth mindset and all this kind of stuff for adults, like they just do it naturally. They're like, oh, I guess that wasn't right. Or that was, an interesting idea that I explored and see where it didn't go well. Let me adjust. Like they're willing to adjust their thinking. They're not in a fixed or fossilized state.
Correct. In fact, the phrase, let's try it, is, that's all kids are doing over and over and over and over. Oh, let's try that. Let's try this.
I'm glad you say that.
I'm
when I
afraid to
was
try that.
superintendent, I started to shift the thinking to, let's give it a try. It's so low stakes. Like people don't get all bent out of shape when they say, let's give it a try. Let's just try it. And then we'll come back and decide, did it work or not? As opposed to, we're doing this, it's going to be a pilot. It's going to, like that stresses people out. Let's give it a try let's give ourselves permission to be creative. Oh, I want to be creative. Yeah.
I just want to make sure that we touch on the idea here of culturally responsive. This concept of culturally responsive instruction or culturally responsive schools or all that stuff. Kids are better at being culturally responsive to kids. That their worldview and context, being of knowing how they see the world given their age and their generation, is way closer to cultural connection or cultural sync, as Dr. Irvine from Emerson would say. They're more in cultural sync than adult to kid because my perspective is just massively different. The very thing we're doing right now, my youngest is growing up doing. He knows how to do everything I'm already doing. I grew up and our phones were still on the wall. It's a different perspective. And then half the time, my generation's still talking about, we used to do da-da-ba-da-ba-do-ba-da. And I'm like, huh? Why are we, who cares what we used to do in this case? This case, they've changed. They're going faster than us. So let's take a minute to let them, let's try, see what they come up with.
I'm smiling because when you talked about the phone being on the wall, it made me think of the cord, and sometimes you invested in that longer cord and then you get it all tangled up. And so I'm like, it's so funny as an adult, like looking back on like the cord. Yeah. And we got all tangled up. Meanwhile, the kids are cordless. They're wireless.
Kids are cordless. Yeah.
They're free. They're using these devices in such marvelous ways.
They have earbuds in their ears, and the phone is like, they don't even know
freeing.
Where the phone is. Yes. Gosh.
I love it.
I wonder about our ability to allow for this to happen. As I listen to students, that's what I've been doing these last few weeks, is listening to students and doing, some qualitative survey in some districts. And so we're listening to students and we're listening to staff, and we're asking students about their experience and then asking staff about the experience they're trying to create for students.
I know that you do this work. I'm not surprised you're continuing to really mine. This is exactly what we need to be doing and why this conversation was going to resonate so deeply for you.
It's so obvious. It is so obvious.
And one of the things that Jennifer says is, sometimes the best ideas are in the past and that we push them aside for understandable reasons. And then we really need to sort of revisit them because they're worth revisiting. And I'm trying to think about topics that are top of mind for schools and how can we engage kids in their solving it for adults, but helping kids engage with those issues as kids, and then creating the cultural field that says, hey, like, we're here as you need us, and we trust that you're going to struggle with this when there's obvious struggles, and celebrate and manage and debate and dialogue and all those kinds of things. What are some issues that you're seeing you've been all over the country in the last couple of weeks. Oh my God.
Yeah.
I don't even know if you know what time zone you're in. And so I'm curious, what are some of the things that you're hearing that this would be a perfect opportunity for them to apply some of the tenets of a junior republic?
When you talk to students about what they are looking for from their experience in schooling, what they're looking for is usually already happening, but in small doses, in these tiny little, and they're often to the point of to the junior republic, to the student council, is that we've gone from content and conversations about things that matter to them and put those now into tiny events. So the kids, I ask a teacher, like, how often do you connect what you're teaching to what kids are interested in? And they're like, oh, we have that one day where we do this one thing. And then we have this one activity in June where we do this one thing. And students, when they ask, do teachers do this? And they say, not really. I like the thing that we do in June. And so and then teachers celebrate. They go, you know, what's unique about us? It's our June celebration. I'm like, so the one thing that defines you is the one day you do. That's the entire definition of you. The rest is what? If we could change something, it's that having that honest conversation about what it might look like for students. What kind of instruction do they want to see? What helps them thrive and grow and struggle? How do they get to productive struggle faster? Which teacher does that for them really well? Why that teacher? What do they do? Not from a place of judgment or any of that, but to your point of growth mindset, to get better. Teachers who want to get better, listen to their students very closely.
I am familiar with schools who really engage in the co-creation with students. Yeah. Everything from operations to the way that they teach and learn.
And that idea that she said about the evolution of the child and how she said, I couldn't consider my kid at 6 going to the mines, but they were doing that. So the belief in what child could do has changed, some of it for the good, obviously, right? Protection, care, all of that. But there's also a part of, I think, that has contributed to our perceptions of what a kid can do. And so this is why I think sometimes as parents, we're like, I was so surprised he did that. I'm like, maybe I should be less surprised as a parent, because he should be like someone my youngest son's age was going into the mines. Yeah. Him riding his bike on his own to his friend's house, probably fine.
I know. That's so funny. That's really
Lord.
Funny. Yes. And then depending on the country, I mean, I remember being in Tokyo and seeing a 5-year-old just walking by herself in the train station on her way to school. I was like, oh my God. Like, of course, that's what they do. And we would be like, never. We could never do that. My God.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm not advocating that's the thing you do, but
no. I just
bringing up the question, like, do we have biases about what we think kids are capable of?
And the bias around society being willing to support and encourage, because you can't just send a 5-year-old out on their own if the society as a whole isn't also there as like a safety net. Because if a 5-year-old in Japan is sort of like lost, there's going to be a lot of people intervening. And I suspect that would be the case even in this country. Yeah. However, we don't give ourselves the chance. Our first impulse is to report that parent. That parent.
Exactly.
This was really fun. I'm glad that you had an opportunity to listen in. I know Jennifer would be thrilled to talk to you. She'd be thrilled to talk to you also about the work that they're also doing at MIT around embodied education.
Yeah, we didn't even get into embodied education.
I know.
It was so good.
I know. And it's totally worth it, because I saw it in action within our own schools in Columbia, Missouri, and those schools that did engage in that kind of work to dedicate time really spoke to the values that they saw in student attitude, student contentment, student achievement, all those kinds of things that were like, oh, kids are doing pretty well at this place, and maybe we should pay attention more. So anyhow, I loved talking to you about this, and I can't wait to see you next week. So I'll talk to you next week.
Talk to you next week, man.
You've been listening to an Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. Bye-bye. Music for An Imperfect Leader was written and arranged by Ian Varley. Sam Falbo created our artwork, a wood print inspired Daruma doll butterfly. Remember, imperfect leadership is not a scarlet letter. It's a badge of honor. It recognizes that serving as a lead learner is about being a vulnerable leader, an empathetic leader, a compassionate leader. We are proud to be imperfect leaders, so join us next time for another episode of An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast.